Firing Line with William F. Buckley, Jr.
I would like to begin by asking Mr. Senator Hatfield whether or not he now knows, in the light of history, what were in fact the principal reasons for his judgment that Senator Goldwater ought not to be nominated.
I don't think that Senator Goldwater's nomination was a mistake by the Republican Party, as I felt perhaps during the time prior to the convention, because the Republican Party deliberately nominated Senator Goldwater in open convention. Decisions that were made in the conventions at the state level and in the primaries of certain states indicated very clearly that the Republican Party, as represented by its delegates, wanted Senator Goldwater. I believe that the subsequent election proved that Senator Goldwater was unacceptable to the general American public by the very obvious election results and by the margin of that election defeat for Senator Goldwater.
There seems to be a general discontentment with the means by which the Republicans select their candidate. There's a thing up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called the Ripon Society. And the Ripon Society consists of 2 PhDs and 3 excited secretaries. Their function seems to be to persuade the Republican Party to exactly imitate the Democratic Party so as to preserve the two-party system. Now, the gentleman who runs it is a very able man, and he says, look, we're about to have happened again in 1968 what happened in 1964. And what happened then is largely what you say, that the party workers, the PALs, really decide who gets nominated because most states don't have presidential primaries, so that even if you can assume a situation in which John won all the presidential primaries, but James is the favorite of the Republican Party qua institution, then James is going to get nominated. And they say what's going to happen is that Nixon or Reagan are going to control the convention irrespective of what happens in the primaries. So they say, you get a situation in which polls consistently show that one man is more popular with the people at large, but the apparatus, the Republican apparatus, is constantly attracted to somebody else.
I think part of this was that these people who had been given many of these advantages or improvements had not felt they were a part of it. Why the second most hated symbol of authority of the Watts area, according to their investigation after the riots in Watts, was the welfare caseworker. Next to the police was the welfare caseworker, and the Director of Public Welfare of California said, why, we gave them, we're there to help them, we're there to give these people assistance. Why should they hate us? Well, I think, again, it's part of this paternalism that they sense far more probably quicker than people outside of their area of need, because they see that government has assumed this responsibility, has assumed this wisdom. And I think the thing is true as we started out with the nominating process. We're going to assume that the party leadership knows best. And I want to say the people of Oregon do not look to me to tell them how to vote. In fact, the people of Oregon would resent this very much. In fact, in 1960 and 64, I was totally neutral. I stayed out of the primary campaigns because I knew that the people of Oregon weren't waiting for me to tell them. And besides, I
well,
thought
maybe
the
they
primary,
figure they should be neutral too.
The primary, no. The primary is for the people, not for the politicians. We have conventions for the politicians to make the nominating process. We have primaries for the people, as I see it.
Yes, but I'm of course raising the question about the usefulness of the primary as an institution which you now want to nationalize.
Yes.
Now, first of all, let me agree with you that paternalism is a very, very dangerous concept, because ultimately it tends to become coercive, and before long, you do have a big brother government.
I would say too that last year, in terms of the way the two parties presented their cases across the country to the people, the Democratic Party seemed to be the party of the past. They were applying the various programs of the 30s to the problems of the 60s, whereas the Republican Party seemed to be more in tune with what people believed in now.
Would you say, though, that the voter who expressed, the marginal voter who expressed his dissatisfaction did so as an act of no confidence in the Democratic Party, or was there something in the air that said to him, the Republicans all of these years have been doubting the planted axioms of liberalism, and therefore we want to go and pay them a debt of gratitude? In other words, were they drawn to the Republican Party, or were they simply drawn away from the Democratic Party?
More the latter, Mr. Buckley.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that what happened is that the Democratic Party, at least those candidates who were before the people in 1966, lost the confidence of a great number of voters, and particularly a great number of Democratic voters. We have to understand, take one of the major Republican victories was in California. I'm somewhat an expert on California, as you pointed out in your introduction. Ronald Reagan won a sensational victory in California, and he couldn't have won it without a tremendous number of Democratic votes, as well as getting a good vote from the Republicans. And that was really disenchantment with the, I would say, the ultra-liberal policies which Californians up to that time had been willing to vote for, at least at the state level. The new Republican Party is one which advocates change, but advocates change in a different way from the irresponsibles. And I mean by that that in changing those things that are wrong in America, we must not destroy the things that are right. Mm-hmm. That, to me, is the essence of true conservatism.
Yes, but sometimes, surely, it is legitimate, isn't it, to want to change by going back to the status quo ante. The cliche is that you can't turn the clock back. But if you believe that, then you have to believe also that you can't learn from your mistakes, right?
Because let's never forget that this nation has become great, not because of what government has done for people. It has become great because of what people have done for themselves.
Well, of course, I agree, but we have here a technical problem of how to communicate this to those who disagree with us, correct? And we haven't been very successful.
Yes, I'm an expert on that, too.
As a matter of fact.
In fact, we both lost elections, as I recall.
As a matter of fact, I think that you've done all right. But it may be that there is an essential flaw in the listening mechanisms. Yeah. Isn't that right? In other words, an awful lot of people don't know the consequences of too much government, and therefore what is needed is a demonstration, and those demonstrations are much more difficult to make, are they not, when they don't instantly produce situations that are appealing to a voter.
Mr. Buckley, nothing could have done more to reestablish the confidence of the American people in what they could do themselves through their private capacities, working together and with the independently of government, than the failure of the huge government programs.
Mr. Nixon, I've been laboring to understand something that came out in Fortune magazine in an interview there with Richard Neustadt. You know, he's the head of the JFK school up in Harvard, who's quoted, he's quoted as saying that there is solid reason to believe that an entirely new cycle in American history may very well be beginning. Then he says, quotes, a Rockefeller, or perhaps a Percy, could draw in cadres of bright young lawyers and economists just out of graduate school. That massive shift once started could last a generation. What's he talking about?
Well, I thought you were the expert on Rockefeller. But
Well, I think this is time-ease.
I see.
That takes a lot of that.
I think what he's talking about is the disenchantment of the intellectuals with Lyndon Johnson. I think you of course are quite aware. We're all aware of the fact that the Kennedy mystique had an immense impact, on the intellectual community, and much of it was because of that impact was due to the fact that of style, and also that those in the Kennedy administration paid attention to the intellectuals. Now, President Johnson, incidentally, has gone a step further. He's even brought a somebody into the White House family to sort of handle the intellectuals. You know, here's this little group out of here, and we'll take care of them. That, however, has not washed with them. He simply doesn't seem to have the appeal to them. And I think what Mr. Neustadt is suggesting is that in this period of disenchantment, that a Rockefeller or a Percy might be able to gobble them all up and bring the intellectuals into their administration.
Now, what is it that makes people say that the Democratic Party is through, that the Republican Party has great opportunities which the Republican Party can seize by imitating the Democratic Party? Do you understand that?
Yes, I understand the question. I'm not sure that I can give an answer that would be too helpful. I think what has happened here is that, at least in Mr. Neustadt's mind, and he is a distinguished political observer, I think I would agree with that, but in his mind, the kind of candidate who would attract the intellectuals must be in the liberal spectrum. Mm-hmm. I am inclined to disagree with that. I think it's, let me put disagree in part, if I may say so, because I'm inclined to believe that the liberal disenchantment, or I should say the intellectual disenchantment with the present administration, not only runs to style, but it runs to performance. After all, the intellectual, if we can use that term for the moment, the intellectual is concerned about whether something works. And he has seen all these fashionable liberal ideas failing in practice over and over again, and he realizes that there is a need for new approaches. Now, my belief is this, that whoever comes in as a candidate and later in office, who can bring progress in solving problems, that this will have immense appeal to the intellectual community. Whether that progress comes as a result of so-called liberal policies or conservative policies. And it is also, and I happen to be a believer of this, it is also my belief that the fact that some programs would be conservative in their direction, if they worked, could still appeal to the intellectual community.
Yes, but isn't one of our difficulties a certain lack of conviction, which I think is detectable in much Republican rhetoric? For instance, suppose you had been President of the United States in 1963. Do you think that you could have proposed a tax bill that would have reduced the taxation in the upper brackets from 91% to 70%? Or is this the kind of thing that only a Democrat can do, because only a Democrat could do so cleanly, i.e. without harboring the suspicion that here was a Republican favoring the rich and so on and so forth?
I've heard this argument made, and I should point out incidentally that in 1960, this was before the elections, that I was in a group within the administration that favored a tax reduction at that time. That position did not prevail. Now, to answer your question, had I had that opportunity in 1963, I think that I or another Republican could have done it. But I will agree it is less suspect when a president who supposedly represents the people and the underprivileged advocates lowering taxes for the higher incomes than it is for somebody who happens to be a member of a party who is supposed to represent the
isn't in terms of the future of the GOP, Senator Javits has said about you, quote, he is trying to please both the conservatives and progressives in the party, and I think the experience of 1964 shows you've got to fight it out. Now, you obviously disagree with Mr. Javits on this, right?
Well, I would say that the experience of 1964 shows the necessity to unite the Republican Party and all elements of the party. After all, I think most of the polls showed that about 7 million Republicans did desert the national ticket.
Now, that's obvious, isn't it?
That's right.
Why isn't it obvious to Senator Javits?
Well, he hasn't consulted with me before he made this statement, but...
No. I didn't say that what you would reply to that question was obvious.
Yeah.
I said that the facts are obvious. But why doesn't Senator Javits recognize that? Or, Is he saying that if the GOP appeases the conservatives at all, it's going to lose more votes than the GOP stands to gain? Maybe this is what he means, do you suppose?
I suppose so. See, my philosophy is somewhat different. I have always supported the national ticket. I will support it next time, whether I happen to be a part of that ticket or not. But because I believe in party responsibility, and I believe that there has to be a broad spectrum within the party for varying views. I think that to, as Senator Javits has suggested, to fight it out and to read any segment of the party out of the party, particularly when it's already a minority party, only is going to invite defeat. And that was the kind of thinking which I think brought us down in 1964.
Does the advent of Mr. McGovern, whether he wins the election or loses it, substantially affect the French position as regards its concern over its own defenses, i.e., Mr. McGovern having been nominated by the majority party in America, even if he does go down, as is widely anticipated, resounding defeat, is it going to cause a great many Frenchmen to feel that the guarantees provided by America over the past generation are indeed tentative, and although Nixon happened to win, we can't count on that kind of thing happening 4 years from now?
Well, I should be happy to know how many Frenchmen are aware of McGovern's stand over the troops in Europe issue, you know. But I think that most people in this country think that the problem is to have some people here, some soldiers, making clear that if there is a Soviet aggression, it will be resisted.
Yeah.
But the figures don't seem very important for people. I think that's it's a very elementary way of reasoning, but I think it's widespread.
I believe that the assumption is that Russians and Americans are in agreement to avoid a military confrontation. So the presence of American troops is regarded by the majority of the people in Europe as a sort of symbol, and the symbol is, in their eyes, more important than their number.
Well, therefore, does it from that analysis follow that Mr. McGovern and Mr. Fulbright, Mr. Manfield, calling for a reduction in that number is interpreted by, let's not say Frenchmen, because you all are rather self-conscious on that point. Among those French you know, as indicating a subtle but symbolically significant withdrawal of America's commitment to defend Europe at the risk of war.
I would rather say that I believe that the American foreign policy is changing very rapidly, and that even under Nixon in the forthcoming years, there will not be a suppression of the Atlantic Alliance, there will not be a suppression of the American commitment, but I believe that the American foreign policy is going from total commitment from limited responsibilities, even in Europe. And I'm not even sure that's bad for Europe, because the shock treatment is not perhaps so bad.
Suppose somebody ran for president in America, committed to a reversal of our non-proliferation idea and to giving copiously not only our expertise, but also our weapons to the French, for instance, and to the Italians and to the West Germans, for them to attend to their own defenses. Would you cheer such a candidate?
I think you put the case of Germany, and I don't suppose it would be a very wise idea to provide atomic information.
In any case, it's not a question of running for presidency with this sort of program. It is to convince the Senate. And I don't believe the Senate, even in its present mood, is ready to accept it.
No, but that's...
Anyways, the treaty has been ratified.
If we would be in favor of it.
Ignoratio elenchi.
Yes.
I asked you whether you would be enthusiastic about such a presidential candidacy, not whether such a presidential candidate could persuade the Senate to follow along, but undoubtedly he would be to a certain extent influenced by his popularity in France. Would you say that the majority of those French who are interested in the American election favor the re-election of Mr. Nixon or the election of Mr. McGovern? Or is it impossible to say? I want to ask the question. I don't really care what you answer, but I want to ask
Yes,
it.
my answer would be A, it's difficult to answer. B, it should not be answered. C, I would answer in this way. Probably a majority of the intellectuals are for McGovern. Probably a majority of the political class on both sides are in favor of Nixon because they prefer the man to whom they are used. McGovern is the uncertainty.
Monsieur Fontaine?
I can support that analysis. I don't suppose I need to help to add anything.
Monsieur Godet?
I agree with
How many intellectuals are there in France?
A lot.
you must
Good and bad, but at least there are a lot.
You must first define the word intellectual.
I won't. How do you handle the charge that is probably leveled at you most often that if Kansas City nominates Reagan, what you will have is a reiteration of the disaster of 1964 and huge Republican attritions in the House of Representatives and in the Senate?
Well, first of all, our position in both the House and the Senate is at such a low ebb now that I don't think it's possible to have huge attritions of it. I might say that the system, the ways of financing, and indeed the fact that we have so many primaries now are all things that are much different from what they were in 1964. I might say that in 1964, when you had about 3/4 of the delegates picked in conventions and very few primaries, there was an attitude by the time the convention met in San Francisco that perhaps the great delegate strength that Mr. Goldwater had was out of proportion to his popular support. And this led a lot of people to feel that either for self-survival, for spite, or whatever, that they could run away from it. Now, we don't have any similar situation here. Both Mr. Ford and Mr. Reagan have run in all these primaries. Whoever is crowned as the king of the party will have demonstrated at the polls inside his own party that he has substantial support. Another thing I think that is different is that the character of the issues in this particular year is a great deal different from what it was in '64. As you well recall, there were a number of very volatile issues at the time revolving around civil rights and a few other matters that made everybody a little more emotional.
How do you handle the following analysis, that if Ford beat Reagan, it would be a mistake for Ford to offer Mr. Reagan the second spot on the ticket, because to do so would, on the one hand, not appease the Reaganites, who would consider it ignominious for him to take a secondary position, but on the other hand, would fortify anti-Reaganites who might otherwise vote for Ford and would not welcome a companionate marriage forced under these political circumstances. That is to say, do you accept the cliche that if Ford wins, in order to strengthen his own chances, he ought to offer the second spot to Reagan? As I say, I'm asking a technical question.
Frankly, I really don't think he should.
For his own sake?
For his own sake. Frankly, I must be very frank, I don't know if I were conducting his campaign and he were to win the nomination, just how I would go about the election. And I've thought about it a bit, but I don't really know how I would put the blocks together in order to try to win. You'd be shooting in the dark. And since you are already, I think if I were Mr. Ford, I'd take a big chance and nominate somebody else and try to do something, but I don't really know how I'd do it.
Somebody from a distinct ideological part of the Republican spectrum, that is to say, somebody to his left?
Hopefully somebody that could bring something to the ticket. Mr. Ford has the problem that he has no personal identity with the electorate, really either left or right. He is referred to as a conservative because of his record and his vetoes as president, and yet he does not really have that image with the general populace. He himself refers to himself as a middle-of-the-roader most of the time. Certainly he is not viewed as a liberal. One of the difficulties in sitting on the fence is that you can fall off on either side or something like that. And what he needs, and what he would need very badly in a second spot, is something that would provide some identity to his ticket that he doesn't have himself. Now, Governor Reagan might be able to do that in one sense, but...
in what sense? Oh, you mean for Ford?
Yes,
yeah.
for Ford. But, you know, as far as Mr. Ford is concerned, he would probably need more help than that.
Well, does the fact of Mr. Mondale's having been named as Carter's running mate strengthen the argument for, say, John Connolly to be named as Mr. Ford's running mate?
Well, it might strengthen it, but I really don't think it would properly defense it.
Why?
Well, people vote for the top of the ticket. The second spot is something that may add some substance to it, but they vote for the top of the ticket.